sunny or evening Singapore. I'm based out of Singapore, and it's a pleasure to talk about MLOps. I know it's midnight for me, but you tell me MLOps, and I can stay up the whole night talking about it. So let's jump into what are you going to get out of these sessions? And before I get on to the session, one key thing is if you have any questions or if you have any comments, just put them in the question or chat box, and we'll kind of address it. I don't have a slide which comes at the end which says questions, so let's try to keep it interactive. If things are not clear or you want me to explain things again, just put it in the comment or questions. I should be able to see it and work through that. All right, so I've broken this presentation for today's session into three big sections. I'll briefly talk to you about MLOps. Again, there is a lot of material out there on MLOps, but again, let's re-emphasize of why do you need that and what benefits can you drive within your organization. I call it YAML. It's a yet another MLOps repository. So what is our value propositions, right? What patterns do we support? How do you get started with it? What is the advantage of going with the accelerator or the repository that we have created? Once we finish the YAML part of it, I will walk you through a simple demo. It's not going to be a full-fledged one, but at least it will give you an idea of how this all comes together, and then where can you get help or support if you're stuck on working with our repository. Sounds good? All right, let's get going. Again, as I mentioned, right, there has been a ton of stuff written on MLOps, but one of my colleagues always used to say, right, MLOps is where DevOps was a few years back, and there is a lot of learnings that we can get from there, right? And then the end of the day, right, just like you use DevOps for a lot of the app developments or website development, the similar ideas are there for your MLOps as well. It's basically a collection of practice that increase the efficiencies of workflows, right? You think about CI/CD. The CI/CD, the way it works for app dev is similar to what you will see with your machine learning workflows, but not necessarily the same, right? Because you are going to be experimenting with your machine learning models. There's going to be a lot of experimentation, and a lot of the experimentation is non-deterministic, right? You don't know with the experiments that you're doing or the data that you're doing is a model that's going to be suitable for putting models into the production, right? But whatever is that approach, right, what you want to do is iterate faster and make sure that your model goes into production with all the validation checks that somebody is looking for, including that of quality assurance, right? You want to make sure that there are no biases, there are no issues, there is no data drift associated with that, and you do that together with monitoring, making sure you're doing the validation, and then of course there is a proper governance associated with how you manage your model and its life cycle as it gets developed and goes all the way to production. With that out of the way, when we kind of look at our typical ML ops step, right? I can break it down into these 5 buckets, right? This is the 5 buckets essentially represent your typical machine learning model development process, where you start off with training your model. This is a model that solves a very specific business problem. You will iterate it, on various platforms. Most of them end up using notebooks. Once you have a notebook and that gives you a model, that's something that you're going to go work with. You're going to package them in a way that we can reuse it, right? You can deploy it somewhere and start to work with that, right? Typically, you would put it in, you will create your environments, your Conda environments, your poetry files as well, package them in a Docker container, and then pass it on. What you next do is validate your model, right? You will check whether your model is behaving the way it should, it's doing what it's there. And a lot of industries do have regulatory needs where they need to check for explainable behavior. They need to check for biases. They need to perform certain checks, and also sometimes even document some of these models before any of that models goes into production, right? So this will be your typical step 3. Your step 4 is assuming that your model has successfully passed the checks that you have set up. Now you're going to go out and deploy your model. And this could be in various forms, right? This doesn't necessarily have to be an online endpoint, but this could also be doing it in batch, right? This could be working locally in a model. This could be this model could be part of your bigger workflow processes that you want to do it. So depending, again, however you want to deploy it, you are going to get that model up and running. And then your next step is going to be monitoring the model. Now, this is where it's very different from what you would have seen typically with your app-based monitoring. You would, of course, need to kind of capture some of these things, right? But you also want to make sure that, oh, is the data that's being sent to this API is representative of the data that I had used for the training as well. So you want to make sure there is no drift associated with that, right? And this kind of gives you that signal of when are you going to, replace or deprecate the model, or bring the data that you are collecting from your APIs or from your external sources, and bring that data back to kind of doing retrain the model and start the process all over again, right? So this whole end-to-end loop is what I would kind of look at it as an MLOps process. Any questions, any thoughts so far?
No.
All right. If not, let me move on. So as we've kind of developed this repository, this repository or this accelerator that we have came in through a lot of implementations that we did for our customers as well, right? And I've highlighted some of them, and let me go into some of the details in there, right? When we work with machine learning models, right? Typically in a larger organization, a lot of these things will become true. You will have your data scientist. Oftentimes they wear multiple hats of an ML engineer as well, because they are the guys who are also putting the models into production as well. But they also have to encounter this global infrastructure teams or the infrastructure or security requirements before any of that model goes into production, right? So they will have to make sure that that environment is set up, the right permissions are given. Sometimes even getting access to those environment takes a long time, and that creates a lot of challenges for people to be working and developing machine learning models, and especially putting them into production in a production environment as well. Now, when you come to the second part, right, which is the tooling, right? I'm sure quite a few who are on this call are data scientists as well, and then everybody has a lot of repertoire of tools that they are going to make use, right? Python is one of the popular one. You also see R, you see PyTorch, you see TensorFlows. There are a lot of different libraries, again, associated with some of these things that you're going to make use of as well, right? And depending on how you are putting the models into production, some folks might use GitHub, some folks might use Azure DevOps, some might use GitLab. A lot of variation comes into play. And then when we think about infrastructure as code, again, everybody has their own preferences based on what the organization needs are. Some of them are using Terraform, some of them are using Bicep, some of them are doing the plain old ARM templates as well. But whatever may be the case, just by the tooling option, you can see the different personas of people that get involved in there, right? And nobody is going to be expert with some of these things, or even know some of these things end to end, right? And this itself becomes a big challenge for a lot of organizations to get things into production. And oftentimes, bringing back the idea into the roles, right? The organizations may be big, large, and I'll talk about a couple of examples that we have seen in real life. But they would have a very siloed team, right? And that could be made up of a couple of data scientists, maybe an ML engineer that could be helping them out. And then, of course, they have the broader infrastructure and security teams to kind of take care of, right? And they have to make sure that all of these pieces, from data science, libraries, to how they are going to put their models into production, which includes the infrastructure, all of them have to be taken care of. And like I mentioned earlier, right, when working with machine learning models, your output is not deterministic. You don't know when you start off with the data that you have, that's the model that you're going to go out and create. And besides the data, besides the code that you're working with, you also have versions of the data that you have to take care of. And with your data and your model or your source code, you're developing a lot of model artifacts as well. And that's also needs to be versioned. So as compared to your typical app dev, this multiple layers of data, model, and your source code brings in additional complexity, which is not seen in your typical app development processes as well, right? And lastly, right, in production, one of the questions that was floating around a while back, how many times you have put a model in production and how many times you have refreshed it. Typically, once it goes into production, some of my experiences have been that the development cycle is typically slow. They are updated, but they are on a much slower cycle because now the data scientists are doing something else, or there's another priority that needs to be taken care of. And then monitoring typically becomes an afterthought, or it comes up at a time when things are in production and not all the things are taken care of, right? So these are some of the challenges that we have seen working with a lot of customers that we wanted to address with our MLOps accelerator as well. All right. As with any DevOps process, right, your typical people process platforms are something that are pretty much essential to anything that you do in a production environment, right? Like I mentioned in my previous slide, based on the challenges that you will see, now you have different personas of people who are coming together, right? You have your data scientist who is very well versed with how that stack and that code is coming along. You might have an ML engineer who may or may not know, how that model is being built, or may not have the level of expertise that you have in working with, let's say, Python, R, or PyTorch, right? His task is to take those models and bring them into production and make sure that they remain in production for some of these for a longer time as well. And then you have your infra and security teams that create these environments where you are going to host it as well, right? So it's a larger pool of different personas that do get involved in this process as well. And keep this in mind, because as we go on to our demo, I'll show you, how we have separated out these personas so people can focus on the skill sets that they are good at, and make sure that all of these people or these processes that are used for bringing your models into production and the whole cycle associated with the models is being taken care of, right? So we'll come to that and see, how we have addressed some of these things, right? And a lot of times when people are working with their notebooks or their data or their models, you would also want to make sure that your notebooks are checked in, your data is versioned, but not everything that you create needs to be versioned as well, right? You don't want to kind of look at every small little bits of pieces that you have been working on. But once you are ready with your code, you want to make sure that your model gets built, it goes through your tests that you have set up, and then it's ready for you to either deploy it in production or do further checks before it goes into production as well, right? But you want to make sure that everything that you do as part of this process is shared, right? Maybe it's just one person in the data team who's kind of managing that. Maybe it's a collaboration between different teams. Either ways, you want to have a tighter control over how the model is being developed and how the ingredients that are used for creating this process are known to everybody in the ecosystem as well. Now, as we kind of work through some of these things, right, we created a lot of these templates And we created this templates not only for your model development as well, but in case of environments, infrastructure, your pipelines, all of these are expressed as code. So now anybody who is working on your data science problem or the specific problems that you're working on understands what these different pieces are and how they all come together, right? We have kind of done this whole end-to-end automation, right from setting up your infrastructures, making sure your code is there, to making sure your model goes into production with any of those things in there. And this, we have done it on the Azure ML platforms, but I'm sure a lot of the ideas that you get from here, you can apply it in your day-to-day as well. Now that's kind of the high-level view of how we were thinking through of bringing together these people, process, and platform. And platform is specifically Azure ML here, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot to take away from this accelerator as well. Now, when we work with MLOps, right, and if you're working with multiple teams or multiple projects, right, everybody has a different way of putting things into production, right? Not all of them are going to be same, and that's why this funny cartoon that we have, right? It's working through that, you will run up into errors that you have not seen before, and these things are called progress, right? And we wanted to make sure that we eliminate some of these issues that larger teams face while bringing together their models into production. We want to make sure that it starts at the top level, it's consistent across different teams or different projects that are working on it, while still leveraging the commonalities that MLOps kind of brings into play. And we'll go into a little bit more details associated with some of these things as well. Now, like I mentioned, right, a lot of times you're working on more than one project. Typically, you start off with on a smaller scale where you have your data science code, and then essentially you'll expand into a lot of these things, right? And as you start adding more and more projects, right, each project brings in its own intricacies, right? What you do for your tabular model is very, very different from what you would tackle with an NLP project or a computer vision project as well. And now with the advent of large-scale language models, that brings in yet another complexity associated with, how are you going to work with some of these end-to-end pipelines as well. So what we started off with is, yes, we are giving you these data science templates, these pipeline templates, this infrastructure as a code template. But the way we did this was abstract those steps into a larger repository that can subsequently be referenced by each of the projects. So rather than each project writing their own way of creating those pipelines or creating the setups or creating the infrastructures, they can leverage a broader set of broader pieces of templates that they can reuse in their code while making sure that they are faster to get this project into production without having to kind of go through that whole process again of setting up their infrastructure, data science, MLOps pipeline. And what this brings is consistency across how your projects are being delivered, and it kind of brings in that organization governance to how that organization wants to bring or operationalize their machine learning models within their organization, right? So that's the process that we bring together. Now, our whole value proposition, right, is starting off with speed, right? With these templates that we have, and you will see that we support a lot of patterns, right? I'll talk to that in a bit. But with this accelerator or this GitHub repository that you have, right from project initialization to deployments, you can get it done within minutes, right? Things don't take as long as they are supposed to, and things that from the infrastructure or from a deployment perspective, things are much more organized, and you have a very clear line of sight of what asks do you have from the broader everybody who's participating in the MLOps process to say, hey, how are they going to kind of contribute in there. And that gets into the simplicity of the process, because now the way we have structured our repository, there is clear segregation of duties in terms of what is the data scientist team going to work on, what is the ML engineer teams that are going to, what tasks they are going to work with, and then what is the infrastructure team going to do as well. And we have made sure that there is minimal learning associated with each of those steps, while still giving them the freedom to modify things as they deem fit, right? And once you have these structures in place, we have seen this and we have worked with multiple customers. I'll share some stories later on. It will get you scale, right? We didn't design this MLOps accelerator to just work with one project. We were thinking in lines of what happens when you have 10 projects, 50 projects, 100 projects. How are you going to bring consistency across how you are going to deploy, right? And that's coming directly through standardization, right? Uh, the examples that we have covered the whole end-to-end pipeline from there, right from infrastructure all the way to model training, model deployment, including monitoring of that. And then how do you take the signals from monitoring to figure out what is the right time to retrain the model as well. So we kind of structure through all of these things. And we support a wide variety of different patterns, right? Your infrastructure, we support Terraform, Bicep, right? With your machine learning models, we have examples for tabular, we have examples for computer visions, we have examples for NLP. You want to work with Python, PyTorch, we have support for that. Azure ML also supports a lot of different varieties as well, right? Until recently, we have a V1 version of the CLI and SDK. We have that as well. We support the newer SDK, the Python SDK version V2 and the CLI as well. And again, all of this, you want to deploy it on Azure DevOps or GitHub, both of these are supported. So you can pick any combination of this. The structure remains the same. The simplicity is still there, while we are still standardizing the overall end-to-end process as well. And this is being actively supported. This is Microsoft's way of saying, here's how you should be doing MLOps. And a lot of us from within Microsoft, cloud solution architects like me, we have our internal teams as well, the consulting teams as well. All of these are supporting the development of this. And there is a lot of support and guidance that we provide working through that. And I'll show you some examples for the demos and the videos and how to get started with that. And we often conduct training sessions that go beyond this. So this is one of the very high level ones, but we do some specific as well. And then of course, with customers, we do a lot of these trainings as well. All of this material is open source. So if you want to kind of do this within your own organization, we provide you the templates, we provide you the PowerPoints, not to mention the whole MLOps process to get you started as well. So that's our broad value propositions. I'll pause here to see if there are any questions or any thoughts that somebody might have.
As of now, there's no questions. I will let you know if there was any.
Okay, sounds good. So let me move on. Sorry, this is a little bit of a crowded slide, but this kind of essentially explains, some of the the high level diagrams that I've been working with, right? So on the left hand side, I'll zoom in on the specific sections in a bit, but on the left hand side is something that we don't cover. We don't talk about data ops as part of this. We always assume that the data is available in some shape or form. You can of course work through the rest of the process as well, but that part is not being covered as well. The only exception on that is going to be the feature store. Feature store is something that we do support as well, and that's something that's configurable as you work through the repository. You can configure, hey, I need a feature store, and it will deploy that for you as well. All right, now moving on, right? The first one, the first one that we have is going to be around the admin setup, right? I'll share with you the repository links and help you get started as well. But this is where we'll create the infrastructure, right? You want to make sure you have a GitHub repository or an Azure DevOps repository. These are the two patterns that we support at the moment. You want to kind of make sure you are creating infrastructure as a code, which would include your compute resources, your machine learning workspace, your any additional monitors that you want. And then, of course, you're going to define who's going to have access to some of these things as well. Let me, there are a few questions in the chat, so let me go through them. So there is, okay. Ira, can you help me with the questions?
Yes, sure. So there's few organizational ones. I already replied to them. The first one was, as you walk through the demos, could you comment on the cost of the services used or how to optimize the costs?
Sure, I can certainly cover that.
Yes. Another one was from Thomas. Where can we find these open source trainings templates that you mentioned?
Yeah, so I have a slide towards the end, which will kind of give you the master repository, which will have the links to the specific templates. And I've also promised Ira that tomorrow when she sends out an email, I will provide you with all this material all over again as well, right? So you will get those links to go get started with. And then the master repository where all of these things are hosted as well. So I'll certainly share that, and I'll walk you through the GitHub page where a lot of these documents are found as well.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, just would like to add on the side, together with the links, there will be a link to the recordings. I know that I received a lot of questions about that. The recording will be included as well in that email. Everything will be sent tomorrow, so please stay tuned. Another one was from Saeed. So these templates come packaged as consulting assignments to your customers, or these are available from Microsoft partners to be consumed free or at cost?
All of these resources are absolutely free. We have had Microsoft partners come and work on that, and they went out and created some awesome resources on there. Our customers have used these templates and also have contributed back in terms of, oh, we didn't understand this part, or here's a bug that we found. Why don't you go address it as well? So they are completely free to use. I'm fairly active on the forums as well. So if there are questions or doubts, I do make it a point to answer it in a reasonable amount of time, right? So yeah, so feel free to play around. There is a lot of training material. We have done a lot of video sessions like these. We have hosted a lot of training sessions as well. There is this whole learn docs on these pieces as well. So there is a lot of materials for you to absorb and get started. They don't cover the basics, but they certainly get you started, assuming that you know what is MLOps and how you want to structure some of these things.
Mm-hmm. And the last question that we have so far is from Sharon. How long does it typically take to build a model and train it? Also cost for such.
So I wish there was a generic answer that I could give of how long it takes to train a model. But there are a lot of different factors that go into play, right? Like, how much data do you have, what type of models that you are training, and those factors create those conditions of how long you are going to train your models as well. And oftentimes the initial training is not the only piece, right? You're going to spend time doing experimentation, trying out different models, playing around with your data, creating features where required. All of these takes time and cost associated with that to get it up and running, right? This specific example that we have in the repository for Tabular takes about 20-30 minutes to train it the first time. Subsequent trainings are relatively much faster because you're not recreating the Docker containers that are used for training as well.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answers the question.
Continue taking questions, or let's put for later some.
Yeah, let's continue with the rest. And in terms of cost, right? Let me just mention it clearly, right? Your overall, as you work with Azure Machine Learning, right? There is no specific charge for using Azure Machine Learning, right? Your storage cost of your data, your logs, that's what is charged together with your compute as well. And your compute is the same price that you would pay for a regular VM as well. There is no premium that gets associated with that. And then when you're working with GitHub or DevOps, a lot of these are again, based on what licenses do you get. There is a nominal cost associated with that, but end to end, it's not expensive. And to use our repository, it's practically free.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's hold some questions for later. Let me go through this architecture diagram, and then we can work through the rest, right? And if there are any clarifications, feel free to put them in the chat, and happy to take them on as well. All right, so coming back to our overall architecture, right? We talked about the administration and setup, the infrastructure as a code. This is where we start off with our accelerator. I'll walk you through these steps. And then I gave a playground for the data scientist to go experiment with the models as well, right? And this is something that we call as our inner loop. You will get the data. I'm taking this example for tabular, but similar ideas with there for maybe a large language model or working with a CV computer vision model, or even simple NLP based models as well. Okay, you're going to do some exploratory data analysis, generate some features. You'll pick a model based on what you want to do, train the model, evaluate models, and even do some responsible AI as well. This is also covered as part of our accelerator as well. And you'll do a few iterations of these, right? Maybe do a little bit of feature engineering, maybe do a little bit of model tuning before you get your model in a shape that you believe is a fair enough task for it to do it. Once you have a model that's good to go, you're going to kind of register that model, right? And Azure Machine Learning has this thing of model registries, and they are pretty cool, right? So they not only register your model, but then when you're working with your dev workspace or your prod workspace, typically when you move your model across these things, you break the lineage, right? And registries ensure that when you're moving your model across these different workspace, your dev, test, prod, your lineage is not broken, right? So from a production environment, you can go back and see, which was the experiment that was used to train the model and what data set was being used as well. Now, typically, this is where you're going to do further evaluation. You're not going to have an automated test. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, but there is a gated approval associated with some of these things, right? And then you bring that model into what we'll call as a staging environment or a test environment, and you will, carry out some more tests associated with that. Once those things are done, you will bring that model into production. And again, depending on how you want to go out and deploy it, you might end up doing a batch endpoint or a online endpoint. Again, depending what is your use case, the endpoint that gets deployed could be in a different resources as well. And then lastly, you also want to make sure that you're not forgetting about responsible AI or explanations that sometimes go along with the predictions as well. And then also keep in mind about that, I need to think about monitoring because I need to take care of my data and model drift as well. Now, once all of these things are done, is where you will come back and say, all right, I have a loop ready, and I'm capturing the data. If I see any additional signals or I'm capturing new data, I would want to kind of restart some of these process all over again, right? So that's how our overall process works, and this is kind of zooming into how our accelerator is all built through, right? This is one example of tabular. Similar ideas will be there for computer vision and NLP models as well, and very soon we are going to introduce MLOPs as well as part of the accelerator. All right, I kind of went into this briefly. But then again, you're typically, you might have more than one environment, right? In some of the organizations where we have seen is when the data scientists are working on their model, they only have sample of the data available to them, right? They don't have access to the complete data set, right? So they are going to do their exploratory analysis on this sample data before their model gets promoted into a dev environment, where now they have access to the complete data set. And this is where the whole model gets developed, gets tested, gets evaluated before it goes on into the test environment, right? It comes in with a bunch of checks that you can determine what is appropriate. Once it passes the checks in the test environment, which is where your model gets promoted into a prod environment. Another pattern that we have also seen is sometimes it's not the model that gets promoted through this environment, it's the code that gets promoted through various environments as well, right? So again, that's a pattern that we have seen. So all it also means that your main branch becomes a branch that is representative of the data, your model, and your pipelines that are used to create the model that's deployed in the production environment as well. So we have seen a few of these patterns. And again, both of these approaches are supported on using our MLOps accelerator as well. All right, I will skip this part, and the only reason why I'll skip this is because I'm going to actually walk you through, how our accelerator really works through. But you will see that we have high level about three broad GitHub repositories. You have your MLOps v2 repository, which is your starting point for any projects that you will work in. It will, based on the patterns that you want, right? It will kind of create your specific customer template and your MLOps template that you can then determine how you want to do it. And then it leverages the repository, which I have on the left-hand side, which is the MLOps template. This is where your templates are stored, which are being referred into by your project template as well. I'll kind of show you how this all kind of comes together and how cool it is. Once you see this demo, you will realize of the benefits that I spoke a couple of slides back as well. Now, before we go on to the demo, I just also wanted to kind of bring up is this is not an accelerator just for the sake of it. We have done over 100 customer implementations and more. And some of these have given us the cover story as well. And the first of them is from a smaller organization, Segis. They are a Denmark-based consulting organization that look at farm products as well. And these are some of the stories that they have given to us as well, right? So right from making use of this accelerator, they saw that they saw about 80% reduction in cost of deploying, running, monitoring these models, because a lot of the heavy lifting was done by us, right? And because now their data scientists are free to do other things as well, their maintenance cost for that whole MLOps life cycle was reduced as well. So these are some of the quotes that have been given by them while when they made use of our accelerator as well. And as you can see, right, this is a smaller organization that's making use of it. And on the other hand, we also have larger organizations like Marks and Spencer's, which is a very large UK-based retailer. And they have done leverage Azure Machine Learning and Azure Databricks together with our MLOps accelerator to give them the speed that they didn't get earlier as well, right? And again, they work with a large amount of data, and our whole end-to-end process was able to scale with them. So with these two customer examples, you can see that we can work through a wide variety of use cases, right? From a smaller organizations that doing consulting for agriculture and farm to a large scale retail operations who is working with extremely large data sets to bring their models into production using our accelerator as well. So this has certainly seen the light of the day, and it's battle tested and of course supported from us as we get along to that. All right, so here are some of the links for that. So on GitHub, Azure MLOps-V2. And the reason why it's V2 is this is all the collective information from all our experiences rather than disparate pieces of information that we had earlier as well. There is learning modules to upskill yourself, and then there is an open hack as well that you can do it for your teams or your organizations as well. Don't worry about these links. I will make sure that I share it with Ira, and in your email that you get tomorrow with the recording, you have access to this and more for some of these things as well. All right, so I'll go through the demo. So just a brief about the demo as well. This is, I'm working on a tabular use case where we are going on a regression model where we are trying to train a scikit-learn model. All of these are there on my Azure Machine Learning platform. We are making use of this New York taxi data set. Again, it's prediction of fares, one of the very popular data set as well. And then I'll show you on Azure DevOps, how do we set up those infras and the CI/CD associated with that, and feel free to play around with this, right? So with that, let me jump on to the demo part of it. And in the meanwhile, if there are any questions while I load up the demo, happy to take them before I move on to the demo.
There are a lot of questions, actually. So let's start with a few. One is from Hadi. How do you measure the success of an MLOps implementation? Are there specific metrics or KPIs that are commonly used?
Okay, so the way we have worked through this is and implementing it through various organizations, right? Like how do they do it right now? Because as if you have been part of any MLOps process in an organization, you know the number of approvals that you need to go through before your model even sees the light of the day, right? So what we have done is taken a lot of these pieces, brought together in a common approach that we all can agree on, right? So once you do it once, subsequent projects should not take that long, right? So we look at, once you have these models in production, how fast it is to bring the same model into production. That's one. And the second part is when you start a new project, how quickly can you onboard onto these process and bring that model into production, right? So how many roadblocks have we removed in there? So I would say, time to production is one of the metrics that we go after. And I think that can be an overarching theme or a variation of that could be implemented within your organization as well.
Thank you. Another question is coming from Thomas. Are there any templates for creating a custom domain specific LLM using open source models like ChatGPT as the pre-trained model?
I don't have anything right off the bat. There are a few accelerators on Azure that are supported from Microsoft. So those are the ones that I would refer it. Maybe towards the end, I'll share some links, open up those GitHub pages and share them with you. So that will kind of bring you that perspective. Our MLOps approach for LLM ops is still under works. We are still kind of working out how some of those things need to play, what patterns do we need to support, the retrieval, the chat type of patterns together with retrieval are some of the common themes that we have seen, but and a lot more. So bookmark or star these repositories. I'm sure we'll be coming out with something very, very soon on that.
Excellent, thanks a lot, Satu. Another one is coming from Jim. Are there any Copilot-like functions in the process which can help make sure nothing is missed in implementation? How is it managed?
No, we don't have a Copilot on this as well. Like we have debated this topic at length internally of how to structure this or how to even make things even easier. We don't have it yet, but probably we should be doing soon. But we do hope that we have simplified the overall end-to-end process in a way that it should be faster to get you up and running without having to resort to co-pilots or any of those stuff. But Hopefully with this demo, by the end of this demo, you will be more comfortable working through some of these things. And if there are questions, I can be your co-pilot. Just log a question on the MLOps repository and would be happy to kind of take and support you with your journey on MLOps within your organization.
Thank you. There are a few left. Another one is coming from Sharon. Are all these tools located in servers in the United States? Does Azure also provide data collection and storage? If so, is it located in the United States? Does the user own its own model that he or she creates?
Yep. So your data residency is wherever you like it to be, right? So if you create a MLOps workspace together with the storage in US, I think that's where the question was, in a specific data center, that's where it's going to be. If you want to have a European residency, you can do that as well. So wherever Azure offers its services, you can make sure that none of that data leaves that data center itself. As far as your models, whatever you work on these repositories, nothing gets shared to us, right? We don't have any tracking or any way to monitor what you are doing with this accelerator or what models that you are developing with this, right? It's completely open source. There is no tracking associated with this. And whatever models that you develop using this are your IP. We don't stake claim to any of these things, nor we stake claim to the data that will pass through this repository or this accelerator as well. So it's your own data. We just give you these tools to help you in your journey, hopefully with faster time to production.
And there is one more question, but as far as I see, Vamsi told it, we can ask this question in the very end. So probably you can go ahead with your demo and then we can leave it for later.
Yeah. So one of the first ones that you can try out, which is a very simplistic example, and as you can see, right, there is support for Azure DevOps and GitHub Actions as well. And this is there on our Microsoft Learn repository in Azure Machine Learning documentation. So once you look at operationalize with MLOps, you will see an end-to-end example, which will walk you through the steps that are required for you to get this up and running as well. This is a demo example with a single workspace that gets deployed, right? So let me walk you through what this piece is going to be, right? So let me get on to my DevOps. And this is a sample of the code that gets generated through the V2 accelerator, right? And as you can see from the left-hand side, let me zoom in a bit so you can see it better. We talked about the different personas of people that get involved in this, right? And that's where we separated them out, right? So we gave a data science folder where people can create their data environments, people can create notebooks, and once those notebooks are ready, they can create these Python files that can leverage by an ML engineer to help create the pipelines as well. So there are two types of pipelines that we talk about. We have your Azure ML pipelines that are used to train the model, and these can be steps that can be customized to your needs, right? So now we are not making use of any massive things as well, but simple stuff like, hey, tell me your data, tell me your validation data, and these are being fed to your Python files that you have. So as long as you create the pipeline.yaml file for your training, your online deployment or your batch deployment pipelines for your model deployment, any of these DevOps pipeline, right? And I'm showing you an ADO example, but let's say you configured it for GitHub, it's still going to be the same. It will leverage your pipeline and your code the way you have it and bring it all together to kind of create that whole end-to-end experience for you, right? So we have not only the infra deployment template, but also the model training, and as an example, an endpoint, an online endpoint, a real-time online endpoint, together with some unit tests that you can do from there. And these cover one of the many examples that are being supported from our accelerator as well, right? So that's your persona for your ML engineer as well. And then for infra teams, these are some of the steps that we can kind of leverage of creating the workspace, creating the resource groups, and everything that goes along with creating a workspace where the data scientist can train the model, or essentially have a production type of environment as well. Once that is ready, I'm going to run the pipelines as well. So I can just trigger it, creating a new pipeline, point to where the pipelines are, and get these things up and running, right? So now these steps, as you can see, let me pull it up. It's going to do a lot of these things. Let me zoom out a bit more. As you can see, it does all your basic steps, which are going to be common, specifically if you're working with Azure Machine Learning, creating a resource group, creating your workspace, connecting it, making sure your compute is available before checking it out. And over here, we have set it up for one environment. I'll show you some other examples where we can scale it to multiple environments as well. Now, once these pipelines are there, I have the pipeline that I showed you earlier, which was related to a development training environment. And here's the pipeline where it's running, right? Let me show you how it looks in an Azure machine learning environment. So I have a job which I ran a while back, and you can see, right, it put together all of these pipelines for me and ran all of them, and it followed the steps that I had architected in that specific pipeline as well. So what the ML engineer sees is, oh, I have to run this pipeline. The data scientist is configuring the pipeline the way he or she wants it to get configured. And then each one of them is just kind of doing their piece of the job. And these pipeline templates bring everything together and help you execute it in a repeatable manner as well. So that's how this run pipeline works. And once it's done, there are some checks that are done before the model gets registered into the environment as well. Once this is done, I create an online endpoint, and that gets deployed and tested as well, right? So I do a very quick test to make sure it's working, and it gives me the results that are expected out of that as well. So once I go back into my Azure Machine Learning environment, I can go onto my endpoint. You can see that I have an endpoint with 100% of the traffic going to my specific deployment that we have. Now, this is also a pattern that we have taken care of while working on this accelerator as well. So let's say you do another model, right? And then what this pipeline would do is not just directly replace your deployment. It will divert the traffic in a very measured way while making sure that it's done in a very structured manner, right? So right now, let's say you have this version 1, you had another version 2 that came along. It will slowly start with 5% of the traffic going to version 2, and then depending on the pattern that you have described, it will then migrate all the traffic to the version 2 of your endpoint as well. So that patterns are being taken care of as well. So it kind of does your blue-green type of deployment while without you having to kind of determine how that patterns are going to work out as well. So that's a brief on how this accelerator works, and these are the steps that I showed you as part of these pieces as well. Now, for those who want to get started, right, let me paste the link in the chat. I don't know if there is a common chat associated with this, but maybe I'll share it with you later. So this is MLOPs, Azure MLOps-V2 is our landing accelerator as well. It kind of walks you through some of the structures, some of the getting started, some of the demos, some of the training materials, all of the stuff that I shared with you. All of this is available for you as well. So this is your starting point of where you will get started with. And once you have this repo working in your environment, what you are going to do is start configuring how you want your infra to be done. We support Terraform Bicep. What project type that you're going to work with. Which MLOps version that you want to work with. Where is the orchestration going to go play with, right? So what it's going to do, it's going to create a specific repository for you, which is a version of this MLOps project template. So now it's going to piece together things for you and create a custom repository for you, right? And this repository references a lot of these templates that we have, which are these standard step templates that are being referred in the repository as well. So I'll show you one of them, the allocate traffic that we just briefly spoke about. Then make sure that the traffic allocation changes based on the parameters that you have set up as well. And these are not only for your machine learning pipelines as well. We have these templates for infra and some of the MLOps works as well, right? So even while you're working with infra, how do you create your containers, your service principals that are required for some of these things? All of these things are taken care of while working with this accelerator. So that's in brief, how we have kind of brought everything together. Feel free to play around, feel free to open a issue, and then I keep monitoring this on a regular basis, and I will make sure that we get to your answer in a fairly in a reasonable time frame. So that's in brief about how this accelerator works. Feel free to play around with this. Cool. Any questions? Any thoughts?
Yes, there are a few questions. Not sure if it's only to demo or it's in general. I know that we are right on time, so please let us know if you have some hard stop with the timing. So far, I see 3 questions. But yeah, maybe before we start that, if someone else will be typing in more questions, if you can let people know how they can get in touch with you, or how it's better to get all the questions addressed after the webinars, if they will have any.
So search for me on LinkedIn. I'm right there. But if anything else, open up an issue log, and if there is anything specific, they can certainly chat with me here or message me on LinkedIn. That would be the best two ways to get started. And based on what your question is, I can direct you how to get in touch with me further.
Great, thank you. So let's probably take this one and then let us know if you'd like to proceed further. So from Vamsi, how does MLOps also fit for large language models or Gen AI in general? Is Microsoft investing in LLMOps as well? Do you see any difference between typical MLOps and LLMOps?
So yes, so to answer your question, is Microsoft investing? Yes, we are. In your Azure ML approach, we have these approach of prompt flow, where just like how I showed you the pipelines, you can create your step-by-step pipeline of creating your LLMOps application as well. We also offer a lot of fine-tuning on large language models as well, without you having to write any piece of code as well. So there is a lot of investment that is certainly going around of making this whole end-to-end process easy as well. Having said that, right, we are also working on, how do you guide people on working through some of these patterns as well, right? There are a lot of patterns that we have seen in the field, which are harder to abstract. So what we are doing right now is creating some of the common themes that we have seen, and then working towards like how do we get them in there. So keep a watch out on our GitHub accelerator in the next month or two. I'm sure we'll have something quick to share as well.
Thank you very much. Another question was from Sharon. Is there a way for Microsoft to prevent bad actors to create AI models for nefarious end uses, for example, nuclear weapons, device modeling, chemical, biological weapon production, breaking encryption codes, anything like that?
I think this will be very specific to LLM models. I'll pass this question on for now.
Okay, got it. Another one was from Jim. How did the organization differentiate improvement from accelerator versus just the usual variation in time it takes to build and tune a model?
Can you repeat that question again? I just want to make sure I understood it correctly.
How did the organizations differentiate improvement from accelerator versus just the usual variation in time it takes to build and tune a model?
Yep. So see, the data science process takes its own time to develop, right? Sometimes you might not have the right data set. Sometimes the models are not sufficient to go work with it as well, right? So that part is where we call the inner loop, right? And this is where we give in our accelerator, right? You saw that a quick example with the pipelines that we had, right? We give complete freedom for the data scientists to play within that bounds of what they want to do within that inner loop itself, right? This is where the creativity and the exploration of the data scientist is really going to help them out, right? So that part is essential, right? That part we cannot speed up, and there is no way for us to speed up and generalize and say, okay, here's how you would structure some of these things, right? Where we help you out is once you have these processes in place and once you give me a pipeline, right, I can show you how to do that. I can show you how to take the model into production, bring across the different stages. And then once you have that in place, how do you capture some of the data back so that you know what's happening with your model, so you can make a good decision about is it the right time to train the model, or we can make do with what we have as well. So we are kind of helping you out with the outer structures of it while making sure that the data scientist is really working on the bottom part of it, right? So the first time when you do it, it's going to be you will have your learning steps, but once you do that once, you will know how these things all fall into place, and subsequently we believe that your majority of your time will be spent in developing a better model rather than worrying about, you know, how am I going to take this model and put it into production.
Thank you very much. And last question of for today, it's coming from Arabiant. What is the governance approach on infra allocation, business versus IT?
Okay, so there are different ways of interpreting this question, so feel free to ask or follow up later on if I have not answered your question onto some of these things. Now, having worked across multiple different organizations and you know, also being an owner of some of these things in my prior roles, one of the things I've seen is every organization has their own approach of how they want to approach and tackle infrastructure, right? And oftentimes it's based on their experiences, or sometimes it's the rules and regulations that govern how things need to be tackled. And sometimes there are reasons for security where things are done in a way that they are supposed to be done, right? So all the examples that I showed you here are essentially open in that sense. It's not like you will be able to go on a link even if I shared it, but sometimes people want to keep them in their private virtual network as well, and those sort of implementations take time. So where we kind of come out and help with this infrastructure part is giving you the right set of templates on what is really needed for us to get things up and running, right? And with this, whether it's Terraform, whether it's ARM, whether it's Bicep, by all of these approaches, we give you a way where, or we give you patterns that you can essentially start to leverage that within your organization and start to build up from there, right? And we have seen different patterns come through, but it's one of these three that we have most commonly seen when organizations are working on infrastructure as a code deployments within their organizations as well.